called the increasing power of categories or concepts or ideas. Ideas now move worlds. It was fashionable at one time, only about 80 years ago, even 50 years ago. In Bengal, it probably was fashionable till 40 years ago, to say that there is always a substratum of material realities which underpin ideas or imageries or subjectivities. That is the assumption on which much of radical left-wing intellectual culture talked about. Things have changed because ideas and categories have begun to acquire a power of a very different kind. One of the powers, many of the ones we know, I do not want to go into areas where most of us have some inkling of. But one important part of the story is what in clinical parlance you might call concretization and reification you might call it also. That ideas which were originally a approximation and was known for that, no longer remained that. They have acquired a concrete shape and they have taken over the domain which they are supposed to describe. I will give very concrete examples. Let us take the case of intelligence tests. At one time, intelligence tests, when they were devised, there was criticisms about how good they were, how much reliability or validity you could attribute to it. Even those who used the test were fully aware of it, that intelligence test measures intelligence, but that measurement is colored by cultural differences, individual exposures, and so on and so forth. Those debates gradually vanished. Gradually, the operational definition of intelligence changed. Intelligence no longer remained a quality of behavior which we assume it to be or assumed it at one time to be. Intelligence became what intelligence tests measure. That is the definition in psychology. Intelligence is what intelligence tests measure. At least 4 generations of children in Great Britain, for instance, were denied higher education because they failed in their intelligence test to measure up to the requirements for higher education. Because intelligence is what intelligence test measures. There is no scope here for those who are measuring or who are using the measure to decide whether a person coming from a tribal background, totally unexposed to the kind of devices you use in an intelligence test, feels comfortable with it or not, and you go as if that it is the measure. It is the whole concept has been concretized, and gradually this is not only there. My mother could look at my face and say, their eyes seem to be slightly watery, and are you running a fever? Are you feeling okay? Or she will say, touch my forehead and say, oh, you seem to have a slight temperature. Don't go to school today. My granddaughter cannot say that she is ill unless the thermometer tells her. Our touch with our own body has diminished to the extent that we are dependent on measurement called the instrument called thermometer. This has happened in every sphere of life, every sphere of this kind of concretization. And I believe that this kind of concretization also leads to some kind of an objectification, not the objectification we generally talk about, that you treat human beings as objects, which also is there, and this is which is a more important characteristic, but it is it is a attempt to concretize something which is not that concrete at all. So, your personal judgment is influenced. This is one. Secondly, there is the matter of split legitimation, I have called it, that certain kinds of achievements and creativity are the credit for them, those creations are attributed to the person who creates it. Sir Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin and he got duly the Nobel Prize for it. There is no doubt about that, no objection to that, that is taken for granted. But the negative discoveries of knowledge do not seem to have any authors, do not seem to have any discoverers. You cannot tell me clearly who are the persons capable of developing the hydrogen bomb or nuclear bomb specifically. And nobody tries to hold them culpable, nobody was tried for that. Indeed, that particular kind of negative creativity is always imputed to institutions and countries. So, who discovered nuclear weaponry? We do not know, but people will be quite willing to say American imperialists did it, Soviet communists did it, the military industrial complex did it, General Eisenhower said that, and so on and so forth. There are no individuals. It took me 30 years to find out that Xylon B, the poison gas used to kill probably little less than 1 million people in Auschwitz, the concentration camp. Who discovered it? Accidentally, once when I was in Berlin, I began to search because he was a German, I had heard vaguely. And I did find the name, and I did discover a long biographical essay by him, on him. And then for the first time, after 30 years of search, I found who discovered that. He was never tried. He was a famous chemist. He also had a partly Jewish ancestry, even though the Jews were the main victims of Xylon gas B. So, this is the case with all negative discoveries of science. The scientists are never responsible for them. Those who are sponsoring it along, no specific culpability can be assigned to them. So, it was the case with genocides till quite recently. Now, things are changing in genocide. Mr. Winston Churchill in 1943, to build a buffer stock of food grains for England, they had full grain fully. They had the food grains, but they were afraid that German invasion might come and they might run short of it. They purchased from Bengal all the crops of rice, a little bit of wheat also was there, but mostly rice. And Bengal that year had no shortage of rice. But there was a famine. 3 million, 30 lakhs, 3 million people died from it. Nobody called it a genocide. It is now Madhusri Mukherjee, a physicist, wrote a book on Bengal famine, producing the evidence for it. And Churchill's argument for it was this, that these people are nature's excess baggage, a beastly people with a beastly religion. That's how he described it. And that death was almost, he talked as if it was a way of cleansing the world of his excesses. I found out that later on, because I am now studying also genocide, so last 15 years I have been studying that. I found that before that England has imposed 2 famines on Ireland, and a similar political famine was imposed by Soviet Union on its people in Ukraine. A similar famine was imposed on the Chinese people by Mao Zedong. Famine as a strategy of genocide or technique of genocide has been a contribution of the 20th century. Civilized world. None of them were illiterate, none of them were unacquainted with with the consequences of their work, and none of them were held culpable for them. So that's the second one. This is what I meant by split legitimation. You have to, if I want to understand our times, this is the second principle you have to remember. And the third principle is this, that we learned in the last 150 years how to convert space into time and time into space. Not the way Einstein thought of it, but in a different way. Because, for instance, what was previously a synchronic difference, different cultures were different. And you went to another culture, you expected to find its peculiarities, its strengths and weaknesses, its charms and attractiveness, and also its oddities. But these cultural differences no longer remained cultural and differences. The synchronicity was converted into a diachronic process. So, anyway, I would like to explain it. No, there is. Huh? So, no, I can just explain, I think it is good enough. So, what was a synchronic difference was turned into a diachronic difference. The present was partly exported to the past, and that became an earlier stage of your own self. So, that was the new cosmopolitanism, that yes, in Albert Schweitzer words, the famous missionary doctor who worked in Africa for Africans, spent all his life that That African is my brother, but a younger brother. Because here was a different culture and civilization. You don't see as differences, you see it as what you were previously. It was primitive, atavistic self of yours, you have left it behind. That of course gave you two advantages. One is this, that you knew, everybody knew what your future is, because what you aspire to be is present already in the world, and you will be that tomorrow. I can tell to you, Saswat, that I was like you in my innocence, in my atavistic past, but but I have transcended that phase. So tomorrow you will be like me if you read the right textbooks I have prescribed. And I grant to complete equality as a human being, but there you are. And also, because you will be in future like me, and I am living out your future, I of course can appoint myself your consultant in the meanwhile, guide you to it. Oh, that is the implication down from Darwinian evolutionism in social evolutionism. It came to India to Herbert Spencer and others for this, for the lesser mortals, packaged in the right way for the colonial things. I mean, Cecil Rose talk of the African and half savage, half child, but and India and China as kind of decadent ancient civilizations where past was celebrated. Rightly so. But now they need a different kind of interaction with a more vigorous young civilization like Europe. And if you have the right kind of temperament, right kind of learning and knowledge, you will be integrated into that civilized world on a new footing. That's what the thing. So age became a kind of the Africans were infantile, and so that's why half savage, half child. Indians and Chinas were decadent people who have lost touch with their own civilization. Max Muller, the first person in the West, not the first one, but first great scholar, he should make every doctoral student of his take a vow that they will never visit India while working on India, because the India that is there is a false India. The real India is dead. It was 3,000 years ago. He himself never visited India. Once Tagore's grandfather, Dwarkanath Thakur, I think it was Dwarkanath, he went to England. He was, I think, some kind of a he was some kind of a counsel for the in England, and he invited Max Muller to his place and thought he will entertain him by making him listen to some Indian musicians and so on and so forth, instruments and so on. So Max Muller was very kind. He came and listened to the music, and then said, "I'm afraid, Mr. Tagore, that I don't see in Indian music," it was Indian classical music, "neither any melody nor any rhythm nor any harmony." He is the great expert on Indian, on India, saying that. As you well perhaps know, those who have some interest in music perhaps know that he was right on the third point. Indian music didn't have harmony. that came in later. But Indian rhythm, the percussion instruments and so on and so forth, is at least 20 times as sophisticated as Western percussions, because I mean the talas, the 16-beat, 14-beat, 12-beat, 7-beat, 9-beat, I mean these are absolutely unknown in the Western music. But the percussions are played a very simple basic thing, little bit like our dadra and so on and so forth. That's about all. It looks, for Indian musician, it is very simplistic. You know. And as far as melody goes, it is also extremely sophisticated, because it is actually it's a melodic line. Indian music, classical music, both North Indian and Carnataki, is basically single melodic line. All the complexity comes from that. And the improvisations also come on the basis of that. So it is a very sophisticated. There is no improvisation in Western classical music. There is improvisation of different kind. You can play Beethoven's 7th century symphony in various ways, according to the great directors can play it very differently. It sounds very sophisticated ways. But that's a different thing. The melodic line here is very complex and very complicated. Okay, so that's that I want to say. So these three are the basic vectors in the life which we have been leading, and all have a psychological component to it, which we have tried very hard to disown, because a certain kind of objectification, now in a different sense I am using the word, in the name of materialism, has dominated our thought during the last 150 years. So this is the problem. So that is why we are trying to always catch up, and our future have been stolen, if I may call it so. Yeah. So we have lost the right to even imagine a different kind of future, which I think lived at least in dissenting movements, dissenting ideas and thoughts till quite recently, but even that has begun to diminish. It is in that context now, in this context of these three processes, out of this split legitimation thing I talked about, I will not now bring in, because that's not that relevant. But in what we are going to talk about urbanity and relationship with the village, is doesn't have much to do with that. So I will forget that. The other two are very important and is very crucial to the way we have looked at the city and the village. Now it is very difficult to find in India any educated person who doesn't believe that the future of all villages is to become a city. The village is a primitive way of organizing your habitat and your lifestyle, and as almost the next stage, you go and become a city. This is an idea which now has been given up by more serious thinking urbanologists, because however much you go back into the past, data shows there were always cities, whether it is the Greek cities or Indian cities, Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and now other new archaeological findings. They all show that city and village always live together. So the question of village being an earlier stage of city, by falling in the frame of the last thing, this synchronicity and diachronicity, we have in one sense lost certain things. And one of the things is that if you judge by Indian literature, is this, that the dialectics between the city and the village, and even the cross criticisms of the city and the village, was a very lively venture in this part of the world, even in China, even in West Asia. If you read Shudrak Mrichakoteka, you will find it ends with a revolution. But that's not what I am talking about. I am talking about the fact that there is a very lively dialogues where the villagers are constantly criticizing the Nagariks, citizens in the cities, and the urbanites, the Nagariks, are always criticizing the rural people. As their mutual cross criticisms give a certain dialectics and kept certain kind of things open for you, because in this dialogue it was clear that there cannot be an exclusionary politics as far as village and city goes. It is not that by eliminating the criticisms of the villages, you will have a more perfect society. You cannot have it, because for each the other is always a temptation and a standing criticism, the village and the city. That dialectics we have lost. That's dialectic we have lost. And one of the reasons for the resurrection of the dialectics during the freedom movement, not only in Gandhi, who is the ultimate proponent of the village as a utopia, was that awareness that loss was there. That loss was there. Gandhi was no uncritical admirer of Indian village. He talked of Indian villages as dung heaps. That is his terms. He used the term dung heaps. But he resurrected it because he read some of the pathologies of Indian society as a direct product of urban India in its new form. Previously, cities were places of pilgrimage, power, and cultivation, centers of art, and so on and so forth. But in the process of now, and there were also commercial centers, but now cities were becoming the prime movers of society, where we also derived your ethical frames according to the needs of the city. So there is this dialectics which they wanted to restore. Perhaps the one who tried to restore it most systematically was, intellectually systematically, I mean, was Kumaraswamy, the famous art critic. Maybe most people know him as art critic, but in his model there was a kind of acknowledgement of this importance of the rural, rural as a not only as a complement of the urban thing, and urban as a complement of the rural, both were there, but of a kind of a paradigm. This dialect was a paradigm of all other, it could be translated into all other kinds of, this time I may be using the thing. This is also implicit in, by the way, in Gandhi, J.C. Kumarappa and other stalwarts. Thanks. No, this is okay. Thank you. village is to the city what craft is to art as we understand it. And Kumaraswamy was also trying to reintroduce the dialectics between art and craft, continuity. The craft was not an inferior sort of activity which you only see when you want to see some Adivasi artwork, but it is art in also in its grand sense, there is continuity. Now, the folk versus the, let me call it Sanskritic for the moment. This is not the right word, I can warn you. This is the low brow, that one. I will come to explain what I mean by this, because this is more problematic. And these are all analogous, huh? These are all translatable. Each one. And let me see what I wrote, what else. Tradition, this is moved by tradition, not in a negative sense, but in a positive sense, versus modernity. They want to see it that way. The this is not techne. This is an institution of technology. You will know what is techne is, the principle of technology, techne, versus episteme, the theory of episteme, the theory of techne. Because this is always thought, each of these sectors is thought to be better over the last 150 years. That's the way it looks. I mean, Marx talked of the peasant life as peasants as a sack of potatoes. And it's not an accident that the two famines took place in Soviet Union and China, which I referred to earlier, the totally artificial man-made famines. In Soviet Union, they even made it legally culpable to give arms to the famine-stricken when they scattered over China from the famine-stricken areas. It was a crime. No, not China, Soviet Union. Famine was in Ukraine, when the people couldn't give them arms legally, because this was seen as dispensable populations. So, the three great peasantries of the world now will survive only in novelists like Tolstoy. Russian peasantry, the Chinese peasantry, both are finished, and the Indian peasantry is being finished. In the last 15 years, more than 300,000 peasants have committed suicide. You hear less of it because there is tremendous political pressure on not to give prominence to peasant suicides by the present regime, but even earlier regime is very uncomfortable about it. They changed the definition In each case, they tried to find the instructions given to Indian states that you change when person, suppose for example, somebody has died out for starvation, the aim is to show that he has died of, actually at the end he died of a cardiac arrest. So, put it cardiac arrest that kind of thing. It is for suicide, you put something else, that he was also in very bad health and probably that caused it. Don't mention that it is peasants, but that is 300,000 peasants have confirmed. And if you think India is the exception, no. Vandana Shiva tells me that in Japan, roughly 25,000 peasants commit suicide every year, committing now suicide every year. You know, so the peasantry is under attack because you think they belong to the technique part, and you know, and we don't need them. You know, the peasant versus, you know, let me put this one also there. So these are analogs here, peasant versus let me put it industrial worker. The proletarianization of the peasant is something to be wished for. To turn the peasants into the proletariat, because they will produce the revolution, because the great theorists of revolution do not fight. You see, the lesser mortals, we do not fight for revolutions, the lesser mortals fight it, like the Adivasis are fighting in Naxal infested areas. A few ideologically oriented middle class boys go in and die. Sorry about it, but they do, you know, but you know, that is that. But Adivasis die, and the police forces used against them is also from Adivasi areas. Mizo battalion is fighting in Chhattisgarh, from Nagaland also, Nagaland battalion fighting. So, next census should show a lesser proportion of tribals in India. Many people will be happy about it. So, this is the kind of frame you see it in Kumarasamy implicitly. I teased it out because this is not what he says and this is not the way he argues. I am teasing them out to say this is the frame within which we should see the village and the city. And the criticisms, those who try to reinvoke the village as an utopian place was partly guided by the fact that and helped by the fact that both in Indic and Cynic civilization, utopias had traditionally been located in the past, both in the future and in the past. So, you could have a utopian vision also from the past. Ramrajya is a utopian vision. What you see, what these people are calling Ramrajya, the new establishment in India is calling Ramrajya, is a travesty of it, because this Ramrajya is complicit with the present. The other, Gandhi talked about Ramrajya, which was a living criticism of the present. Whether you like it or not, whether you call it primitivism or not, whether you call it go back to the past or not, he used it as a critique of the present, and that is the way it has been used both in Indic and Cynic civilization. There was this also in the West in the pre-industrial days. The Garden of Eden was in one sense something like a Ramrajya. Rousseau knew of that kind of argument, but Rousseau did exactly what I am trying to show that these people were trying to do, that this the first set of things which have been devalued over the last, I would say last 250 years, and by restoring that we are trying to restore what you might call the normal algorithm of life. in your society or civilization, rightly or wrongly. That's, I'm not giving my personal opinion, I'm just giving you, I have my preferences, but that's a different thing. So, this is the context in which we must talk of urban life and the way it has been conceived in India. And if you do so, you will find that the first set of variables, which were the correctives, have now become a different kind of thing. They have been excluded. And what was previously the underground of the civilization which we call Indic civilization, the high culture of India, so to speak, by which we want to all identify with, and the peripheries and the underground which we want to disown, which always played a different kind of role in Indic civilization by constantly being simultaneously a temptation that for some was to be avoided, for others some to be pursued, and a way of life which was a corrective of the more impersonal, contractual, more individualistic life in the cities. It was a philosophical posture also, if not in, but not expressed in our ways, but it's a kind of a tacit underground. And this is recognized from Mahabharatic days. And this is where on the first set we have now pushed a sizable section of our population. I mean, when you talk of the Dalits and the Atishudras, the lowest of the low in the caste hierarchy, when you talk of the more humble forms of craft, you have actually this kind of thing in mind. What you are thinking is humble is not as humble, because it had another, in fact you can say that the Sanskritic civilization is heavily dependent on its interaction with the non-Sanskritic ones. And this world, I mean, it is not accident that if you read Mahabharata, the palaces were built for the Pandavas was Maidana, and Bhima and Arjuna, both in their during their Agyatavas, during their journey in exile, go and interact with them. Arjuna marries Chitrangada. The prince marries a commoner from northeast, and Bhima marries not only a commoner but a Rakshasi, a demoness going underground, because he has visited the Patal also. The gods and the human beings are not separated by a concept of divinity which is all pervasive and exclusive to divinities. The divinities is like in all probably all pantheistic faiths and all pagan faiths, are also people like us, only immortal. That distinguishes them. And there is always this interplay that that you can go to heaven and come back. There is always this, and you are always interacting with each other. That balance, finer balance, we have missed out. I will give one implication of it at the end. Hold your questions for a while. Um, this in this world of this kind of world, unless and until the other one is recognized in its fullness. The gods are not all perfect in this civilization, but nor are the demons all imperfect. I think I was telling this yesterday about, I found in Yakshagana there is a version of Ramayana where in Yakshagana is a dance play in Karnataka, South India, in one particular community. In that Yakshagana, I am told that there is a description of a, there's a, when in Ramayana they build the bridge at Rameswaram so that Ram could go and invade the demon king Ravana's kingdom and rescue Sita, who has been abducted by him. They had a problem after building it, and they came and said this to Rama too, that unless you perform a yajna, the right rituals for the longevity of the bridge, sthapna, you could not be sure of the bridge surviving. So, you have to have some ritual to ensure the longevity of the bridge. But unfortunately, in that part of India, there was no Brahmin except one, and that was Ravana. So, they sent a letter to that demon king, who was a demon king, but also has been previously a Brahmin who had turned a demon, that you come and do the yajna. Now, well, Ravan was a Rakshasa, an enemy of Ram, whom Ram was going to invade. Nonetheless, thought it was obligatory on him to perform the yajna, because there was no other Brahmin in the area. So he comes in disguise to perform the ritual, knowing fully well that nobody will think of him anything other than Ravana, because he has come in disguise. Disguise hides nothing, because he being the only Brahmin, it is him. But he comes, he is not touched, and he performs the yajna and goes back, knowing fully well that this bridge will ensure the end of his kingdom and his entire clan. He himself would die in the process. So there is this kind of interaction there, and this is recognized in many of the creativity of subsequent writers who recognize what was happening. So in this part of India, there was people like Madhusudan Datta, who wrote a new Ramayana, where everybody knows about that. Meghnad Vatka was the first modern epic written in verse. Amitakshas, that where Rama and Lakshmana are the villains of the piece, and Ravan and Meghnad are the heroes. Everybody knows this. I don't have to describe this. So this were kind of things people knew sense, but didn't. We were not fully aware of the whole picture, because the whole picture was not clear by that time. Now it is clearer to us. Likewise, I can also mention that savage criticisms of the urban middle class and his ways of life were mounted as early as mid-19th century. Bankim Chandra wrote an essay called Babu, which was a prescribed text in our times. Is it still a prescribed text? It is not in schools, not even in schools. It was prescribed test for at least 100 years, probably more, 150 years I would say. Independent India has not learned a lot of things, and this also is one of the new things. So we have dropped it. It was savage criticism of the Bengali middle class. For a much lesser, much more modulated attack on Gujarati middle class, which participated in 2002 riots in Gujarat, and I mentioned it in Times of India column. I had to go up to the Supreme Court to get a bail, an anticipatory bail, and also to quash the police summons. The case went on for something like 8 years, much more. And then, but even before him, Madhusudan Datta had written two farces, Eke ki bole Shabhota or Budo Sharikar Khade Ro, which are savage criticisms of the urban living and those who live an urban lifestyle. The attempt is again to reinvoke the dialect. These were not all, Madhusudan always lived in cities. He always lived in cities. He was born in Sagartadi in Bangladesh, but otherwise he was reared in Calcutta and worked in Calcutta and died in Calcutta. Apart from Calcutta, he was also in Madras, and where from he probably got the idea of this Ravan worshipping communities are there, and his huge community. Modi has recently requested them to not worship Ravana because it hurts the sentiments of the Hindus. But they were Hindus whom he said this, and Modi didn't know, otherwise he would have had a different tone, that the numbers they run into not less than 1 million or 2. Similarly, in northern Bengal there is a Brahman worshipping community, and they also are huge in number. In Himachal Pradesh there are temples to Duryodhana and Karna, the Mahabharatic villains. So there is always this other side, the other side, and without that dark side, your civilization is not complete. This underground civilization and peripheral civilization, the other Indian civilization, is peopled by the so-called untouchables, the so-called Adishudras, and the so-called people of the craft, and so on and so forth. And they are of a bring a very different kind of sensitivity into urbanity too. In Bengal, everybody knows about the Pattachitrakas, who are Muslims and paint paintings of Hindu gods and goddesses. They live by that. But our search for pure Muslims and pure Hindus, is also makes us more and more insensitive to this part of the story. There are two groups of two communities in Rajasthan, Manganiyas and Langas, who are a community of musicians. They are Muslims, but they are ritually present in every important marriage in that part of India and also Pakistan. So there is this interplay which we are about to lose, and we have almost lost them also, I would say, almost. So the urbanity we have now is a compromised urbanity. It is not even fully urban because it doesn't have that feedback. Because urbanity previously also meant that you have some degree of doubts about urbanity, little bit like modernity. Then modernity also must have a little bit of doubt about modernity or critique of modernity built into modernity. That we have forgotten. We are now dealing with monolithic structures. And it is not an accident that the great critics of urbanity in India almost never had much of an exposure to the village. Gandhi was born in a city, he was educated in a city. When he went out of India, he was in England, that in London he stayed. And when he went to South Africa and worked there for some years, it was in Durban, which also is a city. Only in his middle years, Gokhale told him to go to the villages, and he went to the villages. But he has become the primary icon of the Indian village now. Exactly as Satyajit Ray became the primary, the imaginary of the Indian village is primarily built on Satyajit Ray's film all over the world, outside India, and even India to some extent. He had never gone to a village. He himself writes in an autobiographical essay that in his first three, that's the Opus series, three movies, trilogy, he learnt from he used Bhushan Bandopadaya's novel as an encyclopedia on village life. He himself writes it. And he himself became a student of the village life through his films, and yet his film looks perfectly authentic. I have seen his film being shown in Karnataka by Ninasam group in a village, and I talked with some of the villagers. They can talk very intelligently about Satyajit Ray, Kurosawa and others, because they have been exposed to them, you know. So there is that part of the story too. So we are probably at a time when that we have almost lost the opportunity of making that a reality, and nobody talks about the first set of things. They are only for specialists now, and so their voice is mediated. The voice of the thing on the right side are not mediated, because they have their own voice, and it has become fashionable in social knowledge to talk about the left side of these identities as a person who gives voice to the voiceless. I find it obscene. I find it obscene. We should create space for them to voice. I mean, I cannot forget that the most interesting cities, when people talk of interesting cities which have some kind of a background, which attracts creative artists, which attract writers, and which attracts, you always find that usually there are cities which have slums within it. And slums are attenuated villages in many parts of the world. India certainly is. That's not the case of the American slums. American slums are miniature cities also, but down market cities. Slums are down market cities. My first shock in the United States, I was not educated there. I went there quite, in my late adolescence, and then when I was nearing 30, 27, 28, and my first shock was going to an American slum, because I went to the University of Chicago, surrounded by slums. But those slums are very different. Their lifestyle, everything is a down market version of the kind of life you and I live. This is not like the Indian slum, which are absolutely thriving. Go to Dharavi, supposed to be Asia's largest slum. There are industries going on, people are studying, educated and all that. People are, produce cricketers like Vinod Kamli. Film producers like, people don't know, film producers like Manmohan Desai. one of the most successful film producers ever. He lived there till the end in Islam, did not disown it, because probably he felt that part of his ideas came from there. Anyway, so there is a certain kind, and in most Indian cities you cross the footpath and you enter the slum. In Calcutta, if you want to see find this out, you go to Calcutta and find this, that you cross the footpath, there is slum, and you come back to this. So this is not that it is somewhere isolated, which the attempt is now to do that. In Delhi, most of the slums have been removed, and they are not to be seen because they embarrass you. Same thing in Beijing. Beijing has slums. Shanghai has slums. The beautiful buildings you see in Shanghai, which they consider it nicer than Manhattan. But in the basements of those buildings, there are slums where they won't take you. If you if they won't allow you to go in, if you go and just you have to pretend that you are looking for a place to settle down, you are a student, poor student or something, and then get entry to them and see that there are slums. But that is a different kind of relationship. They are still underground as they were in earlier times, but they are now in. There is this interaction in some cities at least. So this is what I wanted to say. This is not the best I could do, but perhaps I want to mention at the end that our concept of objectivity in social knowledge, by which we swear, is actually a license for objectification. And I have a feeling that though there are exceptions and very interesting exceptions, one of the crucial challenge today is to recognize that where objectivity ends and objectification begins. I do believe that even in social knowledge, there is enough scope to fight the kind of frameworks that we are burdened with and play with parts of ourselves to which we have no access. One clue to creativity, if I can summarize in one sentence, some 30 or 40 years of work on creativity. They were, it was became very fashionable in 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Then it has declined. Is this that my feeling is this, that probably a general proposition can be made that creativity in any sphere of life is an ability to be able to host an anti-self within yourself, so that intuitively at least you are capable of self-conscious. You transcend the limits imposed on you by currently fashionable systems of knowledge and stands of consciousness which seem to be apparently permanent, but nothing lasts very much in our world. They are all very transient. I thank you for your patience. I wish I could have done a better job.